it's a very important idea. Trying to get inside his system. The idea being when you get inside is to generate mismatches between that which he must, what he perceives, that which he must. Yeah. Okay? So, we have an example. Turns out, I'll show you three here. And the first one that came to my mind that threw me in the historical investigation was the Blitzkrieg versus the Magellan Mentality, 1940. The very first book I picked up. Everybody's talking about the very fast tempo, very fast pace the Germans were going. The French couldn't keep up. Pretty soon, confusion, disorder, panic, chaos, came totally. I said, that's very impressive. And while I know that happened, because there were so many accounts that depicted that, what I didn't know, what were the internal dynamics associated with the Blitzkrieg that permitted them to do this? One thing to know the result, you literally want to understand the dynamics. Because if you understand the dynamics, maybe you can do it to somebody else, or make it very difficult for somebody else to do it to you. Once again, not just in a physical sense, but also a moral mental sense. So it'd be important to understand that if you can. I'm not going to bring it out here because that's why I went to my historical investigation. Okay, when we go into that, we'll show you what happens in terms of those Blitzkrieg dynamics and why they're able to get their leverage over their adversary if they can't cope with it. Now here's one I am very familiar with, the 86 versus the MiG-15, as they were in Korea. Now typically today, many people, or until very recently, people thought the MiG-15 was a more maneuverable airplane than the 86. That was the general contention, the general projection. Well, I will dispel that. Show you why, make it very compelling and convincing. For one thing, we have a new frame of reference to which we can compare those airplanes. We have the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act. We'll use that frame of reference, we'll put them, juxtapose one against the other and see what happens. So let's take the first go, observation, 86 versus the MiG-15. The MiG-15 was slightly smaller than the 87. So from the size viewpoint, would have an observation advantage over the 86. Might be insignificant, but it's still there. On the other hand, the 86 had what we call a super bubble canopy, the MiG did not. So in terms of the ability to see out, the 86 was much better, and pilots that flew both airplanes commented upon the fact it was easier for an 86 pilot to see a MiG-15 than the other way around. In other words, the ability to see out more than washed away the small size of this airplane. So from an observation viewpoint, the 86 had the advantage over the MiG-15. Okay, orientation and decision, I'll keep together. That not only depends upon observation, but it also depends on your previous experience and training. If that's pretty bad, then your orientation is going to be screwed up too. You're going to make inappropriate decisions, so even your actions can be clumsy. Well, we generally accorded our pilots, at least as a corporate group, were better trained and more experienced and confident. Now let's go to the action where this thing really comes out, tends to show the MiG might be better than the 86. If you were to compare the MiG versus the 86, you would find out the MiG-15 could outclimb and out-accelerate the 86 throughout the entire flight envelope, and in some parts by very significant amount. Outclimb and out-accelerate the F-86. In terms of the ability to sustain a turn, the MiG was also superior to the 86 throughout the entire flight envelope. In terms of the ability to go what we call instantaneous, rapid pitch up or stall in an airplane, there are some areas 86 is better than MiG and vice versa. And then if you were to sort of integrate, pull all that together, you say, well, on that basis there, ergo, the MiG-15 is superior to the 86. And on that basis, it's not a bad conclusion. Unfortunately, some things are left out. It turns out the 86 had what we call a super hydraulic flight control system for that time. High-powered hydraulic flight control. It's like you have power steering in the car. 2,800 pounds was stored in, so you could just move the stick from one way to the other and make the airplane pop very quickly from one direction to the other or pull back. The MiG did not. The point was, when an 86 got bounced by a MiG, and it would lag a little bit, it could flip-flop its turn quickly the other direction. The MiG took a long while. 86 could flip-flop its direction again, so it would do a very quick scissor maneuver and just stuck the MiG out front, even though the MiG, for one particular maneuver, could stay behind an 86. An 86 could transition or shift from one maneuver more rapidly than the 86, than the MiG. And so by going these very quick reversals, the MiG couldn't do it. It just stuck and forward. Because remember, you've got to overcome those air loads, and the faster you go, the more the air load, the more muscle power you have to use. Well, you have to put a substitute there. That's called hydraulic power. It's like power steering in a car. MiG did it now. So are we going to say then the ability to roll or pitch or roll-pitch combination isn't a part of maneuverability? Well, that's absurd. It certainly is. Well, if that's a part of maneuverability, then how can you say the MiG could outmaneuver the 86? Yeah. 86 was one. When you look at it in a broader sense, because it could shift its ability to slip into one maneuver or another, more readily than things. And the pilots, they noticed certain things would happen. When they began to get leverage over another pilot, his maneuvers tend to get disjointed, bizarre. In fact, they commented upon that. It seemed like their minds were coming unglued. Talk about getting inside minds. They get inside their minds and sort of fear, doubt, that certain guy's going to die. People normally don't take that comment. We're all vulnerable. In fact, you can go back to World War II. There's an account by Don Gentile. He was a P-51 pilot. You might have heard about it. World War II, 51H over in Europe. He commented upon a couple instances in his life when he was fighting a couple Germans one day. I forget, either ME-109 or Fox 190. But he commented upon the fact that his fights started out, they're pretty equal, but as he began to get leverage, the other guy's maneuvers became disjointed. One guy literally flew into the ground, literally just flew right into the ground. The other guy's maneuvers became shot down. And he made it when he said he almost could see their minds that coming under. Because you're referring back one day, he wasn't doing so well, and all that started welling up into him. He had a hard time staying on top of the situation. We're all wrong. Think about your own life. At time. Think back at times when you have certain things you want to do, you have time pressure, and it's sort of not sure you're going to make it, and then somebody loads something else on you. Boy, you start getting very nervous. First thing you're trying to relieve that pressure so you can get this done and that done. But if you won't relieve it, it bothers you. Particularly it's about value. Remember, when they're value, it's no value. You know, but it's one of value, and you got a problem. That's the medicine. So that happens. Okay, the Israeli raid. We're talking about the Entebbe raid, 1976. Another example. Get it out in 90 minutes, right? 80 odd minutes, troops there, even knew what hit it. So, go the other team. If you think of any others, I'm just laying out for you right now. In any case, if we stick all that together, we come up with a new conception. Really, it's been there all the time. You just somehow didn't see of conflict. You want to exploit your operations with weapons such that you deliberately generate a rapidly changing environment in terms of quick clear observations, orientations, decisions, tempo, etc. In other words, you want to compress the time over which you can realize those events. Likewise, what you want to do is you want to inhibit your adversary's capacity to adapt to such an environment. In other words, cloud or distort his observations, screw up his decisions, etc. Warfare, camouflage, spoofing, deception, other kinds. Ambiguity. So you want to compress your time, stretch out his time. And that's the idea. Simultaneously do both. Compress own time and stretch out adversary time to generate a favorable mismatch of time and ability to adapt, to shape and adapt and change. Remember, you're not only adapting to it, you're shaping. Don't just be a reactor. Be a shaper too. You're trying to compress your time. You're trying to generate that mismatch of time and ability to shape and adapt and change. Now, if you can realize that idea, then the goal happens almost as a natural consequence. If you realize that, you're going to get this goal almost as a natural consequence. Follow it. You'll start to collapse his system in confusion disorder, cause him to over and underreact and do crazy kinds of things. Because you not only appear menacing, if there's something of value there, but also ambiguous, chaotic, misleading, etc. Competition. Adversary relations. This is more than just war. War, you know, it's not a body count. That's right here. It's more than body count. That's why we got screwed up in Vietnam, where it's only by body count. So this is a much more general definition. You can apply to war, apply to very soft kinds of things, in intermediate range. Any kind of competitive behavior, whatever it might be. And you see it works on somebody's what? Mind. I'll make some statements later on. Very important. Okay? This next chart I'll skip, just an example you want to do. And those are sort of the ideas or notions I had in my mind before I dove into my historical investigation. And remember, the reason why I wanted to get into that is because of the Blitzkrieg. I sort of see what's happening here in terms of the results. What were those internal dynamics? Well, as I got into that, I found out in order to understand Blitzkrieg, I had to read military history. Or in military history, The reason why I did that because Guderian and the others who helped shape the blitzkrieg referred to an earlier year of military history to have a one-liner. I didn't know what it meant. I mean, I knew what the word said, but I didn't know the context. So I had to go back and read it. Now when I learned the context, I go, okay, I got that, and I had to learn others pretty soon. As I'm going through it, I just can't talk about blitzkrieg. I look at guerrilla warfare, regular warfare, dirty tricks, all kinds of stuff. War in general, or competition in general. And then it became very evident to me, when you look at that, the statement I'm going to make now, I almost made it a few minutes ago, the statement I'll make now, you're going to see I'm going to say it more than once as I go through this presentation, but we still, in some ways, don't understand it. Remember, terrain doesn't wage wars, machines don't wage wars, people do it, they use their mind. So if I go after the terrain or the machine, I'm going to have to fight over and over again. But if I go after somebody's mind, then I got the people, then I got the machines, and I got the terrain. How important is that in a place? Doesn't count. Yeah. That's the idea. That is all forms of conflict. Different subtleties, different nuances. Very important. I'm going to say it one more time before we get into it. Terrain doesn't wage wars, machines don't wage wars, people do it in their minds. And I can show you our careerism, in a sense, is related to terrain later on. Different kind of terrain. Think about it. It causes problems. We'll get into that later. Just a little. So if that's the case, then what are we really referring to here? In some way or another, we're talking about human behavior, human nature. After all, he's the one who deal with conflict. Competition. So maybe that should be our starting point. So let's go back to the and we're going to get right down to very simple fundamentals to start this immediately. First of all, I think we want to survive, otherwise die like we As a group, we want to survive. Not only that you want to survive, you tend to want to survive in your own terms. In other words, you don't want to have to survive under onerous circumstances. You want to have some control over your survival, some freedom of action. Well, if you begin to think about that, in some sense, you want to improve your capacity for independent action. Whether you're talking about individuals, groups, nation states, or what have you, political parties. But it turns out we live in a world of limited resources, not only in terms of physical, skills, talents, the whole 9 yards. So if we improve our capacity for independent action, and there's limited resources, we're going to tend to deprive somebody of their capacity for independent action. Or if we improve our ability to survive on our own terms, we tend to deny him. Or if we really get sharp, we can make it impossible for him to survive at all. You people don't have, you don't have to worry about survival in your job. We're not going to talk physical, we're talking about anything with that. So the implication is quite clear. Like this, conflict, survival, and conquest, period. You can be soft, you can be intermediate, you can be sharp. That's the way it is. Remember, World War I was a war to end all wars. That didn't work out too well. World War II, make the world, preserve the world for democracy. That hasn't gone. And I can go on and on. And you people don't have to compete for your particular job anywhere. It's given free lunch. Always. So you not only have conflict, you have survival and conquest in many different modes or nuances. That's what. So, that being the case, it leads me to this comment. If that's the case, we're not only talking about conduct of war, but we can also bring other ideas in, like the theory of natural selection. Creationists might not like that too well, but one of the interesting things about the theory of natural selection, some of it's under challenge too, not all, some of it's holding up, is because whether you're talking about war or these ideas of evolution, they impinge very much upon this idea of conflict, struggle, coping, adapting, and many different views are brought up. We want to look at those views. Remember I said we don't want the elegant solution or the definitive solution. We want to look at for adversaries on elegant solutions, we know his plus some other ones that we have. bring that on to different ways to get through it. And that doesn't necessarily mean you want to accept the adversary's viewpoint. You better understand it. We like the mirror image. You know, we've got to write the hell of them. We're just going to take them out before we get in trouble. You have to understand it. I'll make that evident to you. Okay, so that's why I want to look through these. And what happens when we do that? I'm going to give you an overall, what I call an overall initial impression here. I'm going to go right back to corner BC. Initial impression I got out of it after a few years looking. Pretty soon things start ticking off in my head because I'm looking at a lot of data, looking at it in many different forms. And this is the impression I was left with. I'll let you read it and I'll comment on it. You all read that all right? If I get out of your way. Let me talk to you. You know what I'm referring to under this first couple dash thing here? Variety and rapidity. To give you a feel for what I'm referring to, why variety and rapidity is important. Let's turn the argument around and say we don't have variety, we can't operate rapidly. What does that mean? That means you lose your ability to adapt. You also become predictable. In conflict, you want to have adaptability and unpredictability. You have no choice. Because if you become predictable and non-adaptable, you lose. You have to straight the other way around. That's why. That's why those so-called elegant or simple solutions fall in trouble. Not only that, you have to learn how to work with other people. So you can work as a concerted whole. You have to be able to harmonize your activities or cooperate. If you don't, you can't work together. Everybody has ultimate freedom of action. Then you got to just everything going off in all directions. It can't work. It can't function. So there has to be some kind of things you invoke in order to permit people to focus and bring about that level. We have to harmonize our activities, get into that detail. And then finally, even if you can operate rapidly with variety and harmony, you just can't sit there and let the world take care of you. You have to take initiative. In other words, do you want to be a shaper or do you want to be a reactor? You have to take initiative. This is where the military's got it screwed up. I'll bring out later on. They don't understand this. They get it confused with offensive and defensive. I can take initiative whether I'm in the offensive, defense, or wherever I am. Those are incorrect terms. Initiative, whether you move forward, backwards, sideways, or any direction. As long as you are using the initiative, then you can get that leverage. We'll make that evident as we go through. So what I'm really saying, these are very important qualities. And later on, what we'll do, we'll only bring those out, but we'll show you how they tie together. We mesh them right together with the so-called OODA, how they play together. That'll be evident. We'll work our way through. Okay, with that in mind now, let's step back to the earliest known treatise on war. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. How many people read it? Anybody here? The Art of War. You get some arguments when it was written. Some say 500 BC, some say 300. I added together, divided by 2, and bureaucratically averaged it, came out around 400. I don't prove that. That's what we call bureaucratic averaging. 2 polls say fine. Add them together, divide by 2, we got it right where we want it. Each guy's got a piece of the act. Okay, in any case, we look at Sun Tzu's Art of War. Here's a theme that begins to unfold. Note that first bullet, harmony. Those people who read it will recall in this very first chapter, what's he talking about? How the citizens have to be in accord with the rulers of the estate. They have to be able to be in accord or harmonize with the rulers of the state. They have to harmonize with one another and also the rulers of the state. Without that, the state can't even rule. It's the most important thing. Same thing in political parties. What you want to do is get disharmony in the opposite party so you can realize your leverage. So the very first thing you've got to get is get harmony in your operation. Get people to work together so you can get that leverage. But Sun Tzu understood that back in BC. That is very. Another thing that literally drips throughout the treatise, OODA, the idea of deception. And more than once he makes the statement, all war is based upon deception. but other kinds of conflict aren't. Yep. All wars based upon this. Says it more than once. Another note she brings up, the idea of being quick, speedy, or swift, what I call swiftness of action. He says the essence of war is rapidity, swiftness, etc. Also states that more than one. Then he brings in a notion in a very indirect way, which I call fluidity of action, which he brings out in a very metaphorical way. In fact, that's one thing when you first read Sun Tzu, you're not sure what you read. It's metaphors, aphorisms, and analogies. So you say, boy, that was great, but how did I read? Something you pull out, something you don't get right away, because your Western mind, you're not tuned to it. And one of those is related to what I call fluidity of action. For those people who read it will remember, he made the statement, armies should behave like water going downhill. Go for the weakest, the voids, the fissures, the gaps. Now think about that for a moment. If the armies can behave like water, and if water does that, what he's really saying, in some sense, you want to impose your strength against your adversary's weakness. That's one aspect of it. Another aspect is flow or move along paths of least resistance. A third aspect, since you're working in the environment, you want to adapt to that environment. That's what water does. So there's three ideas of fluidity of action: strength against weakness, paths of least resistance, and adaptability. But you people in a political party don't want that. Again, you see all this stuff, it all is really very true. Okay, so then you use all these kinds of things playing together in order to play what we call in the military the dispersion concentration game. Sometimes you want to be dispersed, it'll become evident later on what it is. Sometimes you want to be concentrated. But you're shifting from dispersion to concentration back and forth. For what reason? That gives you a way of imposing your strength into your adversary's weakness. You always operate in one form, you tend to become predictable. If you're changing that form, then you can impose your strength into his weakness. It's a way of doing it. And why do you do that when you change these things around? You're playing all these things together to effect or to generate what we call surprise and shock. Note, to effect surprise and shock. What do I mean here? I don't surprise you. You don't surprise me. We treat it as an input. I do certain things. And if I'm clever about it, you are surprised. It's a reaction. It's an output. Shock is an output. Or you do things very cleverly as an output, then I become surprised or shocked. Yet you look at some of our military manuals, they treat shock and surprise like it's an input. It's not an input, it's an output. I don't surprise you. You really are surprised by my actions. It's a reaction to you because you can't cope, can't keep up, don't discern what's going on, whatever it might be. You really want to sort that out. You might say, well, this is true, but it's true later on. It isn't. Because once you get that sorted out, then it gives you another way for applying leverage to somebody. Because the question becomes, in what are these different things you do, or how do you play things together in order to get this reaction, what we call surprise and shock out of our adversary? We still have a moment we have shock action, not shock action. You do certain things, you place somebody into a state of shock. And if they're in a state of shock, they can't cope, they can't adapt, they become paralyzed, they don't know what to do. That's essentially you. So this is sort of his theme. Later on, we'll define this. Very careful. Right now, we're just gathering the evidence. And here's his strategy related to this theme. Note the first one. Get inside his organization, know strengths, weaknesses, maneuvers, intentions, etc. How does he do that? Simple. Spies, reconnaissance, pride, every dirty trick we know today, he knew back then. Matter of fact, you read his chapter on spy, he's talking about double agents. Oh, that's fair. Almost. In other words, you're trying to do what? Understand, know your adversary. Remember his famous statement? Know your enemy, know yourself, win 100 battles. Well, one of the ways to help know your enemy is through this intelligence, reconnaissance, and all these kinds of things, to get inside his mind. You don't mirror image. Remember, in a much deeper sense, which will come out later on, you also be able to want to see things from his viewpoint. Try to pretend you are your enemy. Try to pretend you are in his culture. Then how's he think? Because then you start discerning his weaknesses, his strength, and the kind of things he's doing. And you just say, well, this is the way it is. We're going to do the best we can. You're going to make a lot of blunders. It's called mirror imaging. That's one of the bad things he did during Vietnam. After all, we Americans with all our technology are far superior to the Vietnamese. We do what we are doing. They're a bunch of goddamn jungle bunnies to hell. I'm over dramatizing, but I'm really trying to bring that point home. Very important. In fact, I heard a guy the other day said, you know, if you really think about Vietnam, we not only didn't know our adversary, we didn't even know ourselves. Okay, then this you'll see very often in the debate. Shape enemy's perception or shape his view of the world. So you can manipulate his plans, his actions, his strategies, his tactics. He doesn't say it directly. He's always talking about shaping his adversary, not being shaped by him, but if you screw it all together, he's talking about really shaping his perception so he can influence his plans and actions. Obviously not to his advantage. Likewise, he doesn't want to become shaped because then he's going to have problems. Very important. And then the third point, attack enemy's plans is best policy, or attack his strategy is best policy. Now, when I briefed this a few years ago in the Pentagon, this was an assistant secretary level, guy said, well, how can you do that if you don't have his plan? This guy didn't even understand Sun Tzu. It's very simple. As remember, if you get inside his system, understand what he's going to do, then, in a very general sense, and you keep moving about, what's going to happen? You begin to shape him. He starts drawing up plans that are not useful in the unfolding situation. So if you don't even know the exact plan, they're useless. So in that sense, you have affected his plan. You have attacked his plan. Maybe not directly, but indirectly. You don't have to have it. If you get them, great. If you find out, not so good. But you don't have to have it. Next best disruptive alliance. Of course, we've all heard that before. You know, like Julius Caesar, divide and conquer. In other words, split them up, but can't work together. Then use a large fraction of your strength against a small fraction of his. Another variation of strength against weakness. Next best, attack his army. Note that, third best. In any case, before you attack his army, you want to do all the preceding. Because you want to place an army in weakened condition so when you hit it, it comes unglued. And then last of all, he says attack cities only when there's no alternative. And you have some very vivid descriptions there why you don't want to do that, and you can avoid it. They have to do it. And guess what? It's as true today as it was in his day. The only thing different is the instruments we use. Still true. Talk to any city fighting is tough. And then, finally, his point. Employ Chang and Chi maneuvers as a basis to pump your strength into his weakness and do it over and over again. So it raises a rather interesting question. What the hell is Chang and Chi maneuver? So how many people here saw the movie Pack? You recall, there were two instances there where he said, hold him by the nose and kick him in the rear. His language is a little bit more colorful, but basically that's what he was referring to. Now you can think of holding him by the nose as being related to the Chang, and the kick him in the rear as being related to the Chi. Now let me broaden the nose to give you an example. Think of the Chang as being the direct, the Chi as being the indirect. Or think of the Chang as being the expected, the Chi as being the unexpected. Or think of the Chang as being the obvious, the Chi as being the hidden. You can lay out all various combinations. So in a sense what you're saying, the Chang, you're using the Chang to get to expose this vulnerability weakness to your Chi so you can dive into them and pull them apart. In other words, it's kind of in a mental sense, it's a form of combined honor. You do one thing to get them to expose the vulnerability and weakness to another thing, and then you exploit it to the nth degree. Morally, mentally, physically. So it gives you the basic. The Chang is to try to be able to find out what those vulnerabilities and weaknesses are so they can be exploited with your Chi. And he changes back and forth. In any case, what was his desired outcome? That was the first bullet. He wanted to win the whole 9 yards without fighting. So do an enemy without fighting if you can. In any event, if you do have to fight or go to war, try to at least to avoid a protracted war. So here we see sort of the ideas and philosophy of Sun Tzu, and they're as good today as they were in his day. So rather timeless kind of philosophy.